Hello. Several students have asked for us to make some kind of video over reviewing the content that we did in SIM. Unfortunately, we don't have time to make a super fancy video, but I figured I'd make a quick little video reviewing that content and hopefully help you feel a little more comfortable with both the autonomic nervous system and referred pain as a concept. So I'm going to start with some very basic concepts. So forgive me, for some of you, this will be major review, and you can just scroll past it. So I just want to review the different concepts in the peripheral nervous system in general. So remember that the PNS is basically everything spinal nerve out to the body. When we use the term efferent, we are referring to motor. And when we use the term afferent, we are referring to sensory. I personally remember that because a motor makes an E sound when it's running. And when you feel something good, you say, ah. So efferent and afferent are going to be two important words for you to be able to understand and use easily. And the other concept is going to be somatic. So somatic typically refers to the part of the body that we are consciously aware of and voluntarily able to control. And in general, this is something that tends to be related very closely, I think I misspelled conscious, but you know what I mean, to the body wall and limbs. When we think about our skeletal muscles, those tend to be limited to the body wall and limbs. And that's going to be contrasted by visceral. Visceral is going to be the part of the involuntary portion that we're really not going to be aware of. And this refers to organs within the ventral body cavity. So when we move on and we start talking about the different portions of the nervous system, we'll understand that when we're talking about visceral efferents, we're mostly talking about motor to the organs within the body cavity. I'm going to erase this and do just a quick separation here. So one of the things that we do that we talk a lot about is the autonomic nervous system, also called the ANS. The autonomic nervous system is synonymous with the visceral efferent neurons. Now you will undoubtedly run into some texts that include the afferent, but we are going to exclude that. And the reason that we exclude that is just really a huge debate between anatomy and physiology. But clinically, when people talk about the autonomic nervous system, they are really talking about the motor to different structures. And in addition, if we separate it this way, then we can say very easily that the autonomic nervous system is a two neuron chain. What I mean by that is that all autonomic nervous system chains, this is awkward, sorry, both writing and talking can be a little bit tricky for me. Preganglionic, we'll have both preganglionic and postganglionic neurons. Every portion of the autonomic nervous system has to synapse outside the CNS. And so we divide the autonomic nervous system into parasympathetic and sympathetic chains, or like neuron pathways. And, the sympathetic nervous system is composed of preganglionic visceral efferents and postganglionic visceral efferents. Likewise, the parasympathetic nervous system is composed of preganglionic visceral efferent neurons and postganglionic visceral efferent neurons. So if you ever hear the term preganglionic, you know that it's referring to a visceral efferent neuron. If you ever hear the term postganglionic, the same is true. Likewise, if we talk about a parasympathetic neuron, you know that it's visceral efferent. If we talk about a sympathetic neuron, you know it's visceral efferent. Okay, so those are some basic concepts. We're going to review some basic pathways now. So I'm going to start, I'll stick with orange, and I'm going to start by showing the pathway of the somatic efferent neuron. And I'm actually going to start with a pathway, we'll say, to the muscles of the back. Every single somatic efferent neuron has its cell body in the ventral horn of the spinal cord. Every single one will send out an axon that travels on the ventral root to get to the spinal nerve. That's true of every single somatic efferent neuron in the entire body. And the trick is just then whether it's going to go to the back muscle like it does in this one, or whether, if we have a somatic efferent that's going to go to the limbs or body wall, it's going to travel on a ventral ramus. So this is going to be, we'll say, to body wall / limbs. And so flipping back and forth between these two pathways, you can see the commonality is that every somatic efferent neuron has its cell body in the ventral horn, and its axon travels in the ventral root to get to the spinal nerve. It then diverges depending on whether it's going to go to the back, here, or the front of the body. Now these ventral rami are going to be the nervous structures that form the different plexi that we've talked about, the somatic plexi anyway. So the ventral rami are going to form the cervical plexus in the cervical region, the brachial plexus in the lower cervical and upper thoracic region, the intercostal nerves in the thoracic region, the lumbar plexus in the lumbar region, and the sacral plexus in the sacral region. And so you've seen ventral rami before many times. So that's somatic efferent. Now, wherever you have a somatic efferent, we're also going to have a somatic afferent traveling back. So these are going to be carrying sensation on this page, this image, from the back. So if somebody is scratching your back, you're going to have the somatic afferent neuron that's going to travel in the dorsal ramus to get to the spinal nerve, and then it will travel through the dorsal root to synapse in the dorsal horn with its cell body in that dorsal root ganglion. This is our DRG, our dorsal root ganglion. So that is a somatic afferent from the back. If we were coming from the body wall or limbs, we're going to have a very similar pathway. The somatic afferent would start out here in the target tissue, travel on the ventral ramus to get to the spinal nerve, and once it's on the spinal nerve, it will diverge to travel on the dorsal root with its cell body in the dorsal root ganglion, synapsing in the dorsal horn. So again, there's a lot of similarities between, there's a lot of universal truths about the somatic afferent pathway. They all travel from target organs to the spinal nerve on the dorsal root. They all have their cell bodies in the dorsal root ganglion, and they all synapse in the dorsal horn. So these somatic pathways are both single chain systems, and they're fairly straightforward. Now what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the sympathetic. Now that we've gotten the basics of the somatic, we're now going to do visceral efferent, and we're going to focus on sympathetic. Every single visceral efferent, sympathetic visceral efferent, is going to have a cell body located in the lateral horn. Specifically, it's going to be located in the lateral horn of T1 to L2. Every single sympathetic visceral efferent is going to send its axon through the ventral root to the spinal nerve. Every single one is going to use a white ramus to get into the sympathetic chain. So no matter what your job is, if you are a visceral efferent sympathetic, you will be following this pathway. Now the trick is, if you are going to be a visceral efferent, I'm going to just erase that because it's driving me nuts. If you are going to be a sympathetic, which also is just another way of saying visceral efferent, your pre-ganglionic cell body is what's found in T1 to L2. Your post-ganglionic cell body has to be found within the sympathetic chain or a paravertebral or preaortic ganglion. Prevertebral or preaortic ganglion. Excuse me, I misspoke. The trick is, the generic trick, is that if you are going to the body wall or limbs, you will synapse in the sympathetic chain. You will then have the postganglionic cell body located within that sympathetic chain, and then it will exit out the gray rami and travel on the ventral ramus to get to the body wall or limbs. Similarly, I'm not going to draw this, but you can use your imagination. If you were going to go to the back, you would follow the same pathway, but you would end up going on the dorsal ramus when you're leaving. So this is like your standard kind of plebeian, like, yeah, I'm sympathetic, but I'm still going to the body wall or limbs. I'm just going to synapse in the chain and go back. So this is the standard plan. If you are accompanying this as a, let me get a cool color, that'll work, as a visceral afferent, so you're carrying information, you will just go back the other way. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you what happens if you're a really big deal. So let's say that you are carrying sympathetic to the organs in the body cavity, in the ventral body cavity. That makes you a really big deal. So you're going to still have your cell body. I think I actually need to go to the next one. Sorry about that. I did not plan ahead well enough. Sympathetic. So that's visceral efferent to organ in the body cavity. You will still follow a lot of the same rules. You will still have your cell body located in T1 to L2. You will still travel on the ventral root to get to the spinal nerve. You will still use a white ramus to enter into the spinal cord, and you will still be within the sympathetic chain. However, when you're a really big deal, you will not synapse in the sympathetic chain. I mean, anybody can synapse there. Instead, you will take your little VIP splanchnic nerve to synapse within either a prevertebral, this is also called preaortic ganglion. So you've seen these before in lab as, what color did we use last time? I'm going to go up, so it's the same color. Nice dark blue. This is our postganglionic. You've seen this lab as like the celiac ganglion, the superior mesenteric, the inferior mesenteric. Prevertebral ganglion also include the superior hypogastric plexus and the inferior hypogastric plexus. So prevertebral or preaortic ganglion. So this is if you're a big deal. So let's recap here. No matter what, if you are a sympathetic preganglionic neuron, your cell body is in the lateral horn, somewhere between T1 and L2. Your axon will definitely travel on a ventral root to a spinal nerve, and you will definitely use a white ramus to get into the sympathetic chain. However, what you do when you're there depends on if you're going to the body wall or limbs. So if you're going to smooth muscle in the blood vessels of limbs, you will synapse in the chain, use a gray ramus to get out, and then travel on either the ventral or dorsal ramus to get to your target. If you're kind of a big deal, like you're going to innervate a body cavity organ, like that kind of a big deal, you will party hop a little bit in the sympathetic chain. You may travel, but you will not synapse. You will travel on your splanchnic nerve, which is your little VIP transportation, to get to the highly exclusive prevertebral ganglion, where you will synapse there. And then the postganglionic fibers will travel along vessels to get to the target organ. So you can see there are a bunch of commonalities for the sympathetic pathway. So now I'm going to do, let's do some visceral afferent here. So the visceral afferents are just going to be traveling what we call antiparallel, or just retrograde. So just think of a two-lane street, right? We are going to have our receptor in the organ, and then you're just going to travel. You're going to travel back on the splanchnic nerve, back through the sympathetic chain, and back to the spinal nerve. But you will have your cell body in the dorsal root ganglion and synapse in the dorsal horn. So look, we remember the dorsal horn, right? That is where our somatic afferents are synapsing. So now we've got our visceral afferents synapsing there as well. This is the basis for referred pain. I told a story for some of the groups when I was doing sim last week about my little sister. My little sister is amazing. She is just really one of the best adults I know. But she is significantly younger than me. And as a child, she was the most annoying person on the planet. She was always interrupting when I was on the telephone. She would never stop talking to me, and she would like poke me. Ryan, 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 Ryan. She drove me nuts. I love her. Now, I loved her then. She just drove me nuts. But the funny thing is that like as an adult, I have an 8-year-old son. My sister has 3 different sons, all different ages. When my child aggravates me, mom, 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 and he's just bugging me, which doesn't happen all the time, but when he does bug me, I will often yell, Regan, at him. Regan is my sister's name, not his name. It's that I'm so used to being bugged by her, like growing up, that when someone else is bugging me, I call them her name. And the best thing is, our other sister, my older sister Rory with the 3 boys, she does the same thing with her boys. She will also call them Regan when they're being aggravating. And obviously this is, not an anatomically based explanation, but this is what I think of when I think of referred pain. We are super used to listening to the somatic afferent neurons. Excuse the siren in the back. We are just super used to it, right? We know all the time whether our skin is cold or hot or whether we're touching something sharp. We pay attention to our somatic. We have to be able to respond very quickly to somatic insults, right? If we are touching something sharp, we need to stop immediately. So we are well attuned to somatic. We are much less well attuned to these guys here on this image, the viscerals. If my stomach is super distended, there's not something I immediately need to respond to. So I just pay a little bit less attention to the visceral. And so when the visceral afferent neurons start lighting up because something is aggravating, the central nervous system interprets that as the somatic. And so that is the basis for referred pain. They are both synapsing in in the same region, basically, I'm over generalizing, but they're all synapsing in this dorsal horn, which can cause some confusion. So now that we've done like the basics, we are now going to do some specifics for the different body regions. So we're going to start with this foregut. We're going to draw the pathway we'll start here with my preganglionic sympathetic. And we know, right, preganglionic sympathetic, that means a visceral efferent neuron. They have their cell bodies in the lateral horn. And because this is foregut, it's not responding to me all of a sudden. Oh, just took a while. Because this is foregut, we know that this is T5 to T9. All of the preganglionic sympathetic neurons that are going to innervate the foregut all have their cell bodies in the lateral horns of T5 to L9. They will all throw out their axons to travel on this ventral route to get to the spinal cord. They will all use a white ramus communicans to get to the sympathetic chain. But these are foregut guys. They're kind of a big deal. They don't have to travel. It's just what this image is showing. They will travel. Let me clarify that. They don't have to travel down necessarily in the sympathetic chain. That's kind of depends on many different factors that are not important at all to you. The main thing is that they're going to exit the sympathetic chain through a splanchnic nerve. Preganglionic sympathetic fibers in this splanchnic nerve. And we know, because we're going to the foregut, that this is the greater thoracic splanchnic nerve carrying preganglionic sympathetic fibers that originated somewhere between T5 and T9 and exited from the sympathetic chain. They then travel to the celiac plexus. The celiac plexus is going to be where we have the cell bodies of the postganglionic sympathetic visceral efferent fibers. I'm getting some delay in my pen right now. Those fibers will have their cell body in the celiac plexus, and then they will travel out to synapse on the different organs of the foregut. We will have pain that comes the same way. So we'll just do stomach, all right? This stomach is super distended. So we've got the visceral afferents that are going to travel back through the splanchnic nerve, back through the sympathetic chain to exit out to get it back onto the spinal nerve, and then they will travel through the dorsal root to synapse in the dorsal horn. And so all of the visceral afferents from the foregut are going to synapse in the dorsal horn of the T5 to T9 vertebral levels. And when I say T5 to T9, I mean there are some that are synapsing at T5 and some that are synapsing at T6, and et cetera, right? So that is the pathway for the foregut, which means that pain from the foregut organs is all going to send information to T5 to T9, which then will be misinterpreted or can be misinterpreted as referred pain from somatic regions of the T5 to T9 dermatomes. So think about that, just pain right under the rib cage, for example. Epigastric region for the stomach. Okay, so that's foregut. Let's do midgut. Midgut is going to, let's get back to our purple so we're consistent here. We'll have our preganglionic, sympathetic, which we know means visceral efferent neurons. They have their cell body in the lateral horn, and we are midgut. So we know that this lateral horn is T10 to T12. They send out fibers that travel in that ventral root to the spinal nerve. It uses these white rami communicons to enter the sympathetic chain, and it will travel on a splanchnic nerve or two to get to the superior mesenteric plexus, where it will synapse. The cell body of the postganglionic sympathetic visceral afferent neuron will be located in the superior mesenteric plexus and will follow arterial branches to the different organs of the midgut. We know it's T10 to T12 because we know the midgut, so it's going to superior mesenteric plexus. So let's do sensation then from the jejunum. The jejunum is going to have visceral afferent neurons that just travel antiparallel or retrograde back the exact same pathway. Excuse me, I got very messy there because I can't see what I'm doing. These visceral afferents then are synapsing. That was weird. I'm trying to write faster than it wants me to, and so it got mad at me. Are going to be synapsing in the dorsal horn from T10 to T12, which means that pain from the jejunum is going to refer back, and I picked the jejunum because it's a little bit higher, it's going to refer back to around the T10 dermatome, which is the umbilicus, right? So distension or pain of the jejunum can result in discomfort at the umbilicus. Now we're going to move on to the hindgut. And we are first going to focus on the hindgut. That is, hold on, I'll use red. Red will work. Hindgut proximal to the gut tube pain line. So remember that gut tube pain line is basically half, I don't know what letter I was trying to draw there, of the sigmoid colon. So we divide the sigmoid colon in half. If you're proximal to the first half of the sigmoid colon. So we're just going to do motor out and afferent in. So we'll start here with our standard color for our preganglionic sympathetic visceral afferent neuron. Now, when I overthink it, it really negatively impacts my handwriting when I can't see what I'm writing. Okay, so we're sympathetic. So we have our cell body, our preganglionic cell body in the lateral horn. We are hindgut, so we know that this, we can argue about whether it's T12 or L1, but it has to be basically T10 T12 to L1, excuse me, to L2, L3. So we're in the lateral horn. We send our axon out through the ventral root to the spinal nerve. It goes through right rami communicans. It exits the sympathetic chain on a splanchnic nerve to get to the inferior mesenteric plexus. It synapses within the inferior mesenteric plexus. I'm overthinking my Surface Pro. Has its postganglionic cell bodies in the inferior mesenteric plexus, and then they use the arteries to travel to their targets. So second or last third of the transverse colon, descending colon, and proximal sigmoid colon. So this is our postganglionic. I am getting some weird tablet stuff going on. Because this is hindgut, we know that these splanchnic nerves were the lumbar splanchnic nerves. In the lumbar region, we have multiple splanchnic nerves that are all supplying hindgut. So hopefully you've had a chance to see those in lab. So that's, now you're seeing this standard pattern now for getting sympathetic innervation to the different organs in the visceral body cavity. And you'll see the same thing above this pain line with the visceral afferent. So we'll do proximal sigmoid colon. Our visceral afferent is going to travel up the arteries on the lumbar splanchnic nerves. Whoa, I just got like super crazy. And I have to finish let it draw before I can erase. All right, let's try that again. Shh. All right, sorry about that, guys. Thank you for your patience. So it's going to just follow antiparallel. So it travels on those lumbar splanchnic nerves back to the sympathetic chain, and then it's going to have a cell body in the dorsal root ganglion and synapse in the dorsal horn. So pretty standard for what we've done. But we're going to do the hindgut distal to the gut tube pain line. So let's draw that gut tube pain line here. Right here. We'll just make that work. Okay. Bear with me. I'm going to add the rest of my sigmoid colon. So, oh man. You are going to just have to bear with me. Use your imagination here for a second. What I'm going to do, what I should have done earlier, I thought I had the other one set up so you could do everything. Understand that the visceral efferent to the hindgut is not affected by the gut tube pain line. That only affects afferents. So the entire hindgut, including the distal sigmoid colon, is going to follow this pathway where the inferior mesenteric plexus is going to give postganglionic, sympathetic neurons that will travel all the way down to the end of the hindgut. The only thing that's really different is the pain. So we're going to look at the gut tube distal to the pain line. And we're going to start by first, I'm going to use totally different colors because this is getting super crazy. First, I'm going to do parasympathetics. Ooh, that got too crazy for me. So parasympathetics, remember, is what we call the craniosacral region or craniosacral system. So the gut tube, foregut, and midgut received parasympathetic innervation from the vagus nerve. So this is the cranial portion. It's from the brainstem. The hindgut is going to get parasympathetic innervation from S2 to S4. So I'll draw that out first. So here I am. You guys remember seeing the sacrum. One of the things that we saw when we were doing, we've done a few different labs here where we looked at the sacral plexus. You guys remember seeing this in lab? This is our sacral plexus. Bear with me. So what we have is a very similar thing, but we are not using the sympathetic because we are parasympathetic. So this is our preganglionic pretend that's an R, parasympathetic visceral afferent pathway. So we have a cell body, S2 to S4. It is also going to use the ventral root and get to the spinal nerve. And it will go on the ventral ramus. Instead of going on the sympathetic chain, it is going to end up traveling on the ventral ramus. This is still ventral ramus. But then it jumps off, and it is going to bring innervation to the hindgut organs. And there are one every, right, there's S2 to S4, so there's multiple ones of these that are going to all different bits of the hindgut. It's also going to pelvic organs. So we've got all of these little fibers that are called pelvic splanchnic. You saw these in lab. Pelvic splanchnics. Pelvic splanchnics often will travel to travel through, but not synapse within the inferior hypogastric plexus. You saw that in lab. It's just a bunch of stuff on either side of these pelvic organs. The parasympathetic does not synapse there. Remember, this is the one with the very short postganglionic fibers. So the postganglionic fibers are typically located in intramural ganglia. So we get these little tiny cell bodies within the walls of the organ, intramural. And so this is a typical parasympathetic pathway to the hindgut. All right, bear with me. So then when we're doing visceral afferents, going back to my blue, if we are proximal to that pain line, the visceral afferents are going to travel up to the sympathetic, right? We just did that on the previous slide. But if we are distal to this pain line, I'm going to erase that circle. If we're distal to this pain line, we take the shortest route possible, which means we will travel on the pelvic splanchnics to get in to have our little cell bodies and the dorsal root ganglion of S2 to S4 and synapse in the dorsal horn of S2 to S4. So this happens over and over again from all of the pelvic organs, anything that is distal to that pelvic pain line. So I know this is kind of a big concept. What this means, though, do I have my little thing? Why we care about this? We care about this because if you are T5 to T9, I'll just draw, whoops, I'm a little crazy with my line there, but you'll figure it out. This is foregut, this region. This is where referred pain will ultimately go if you are foregut region. Now we're going to switch to red. If you are midgut, you are referring back to patterns along the T10 to T12 dermatome. If you are hindgut, let's use a crazy color. If you are hindgut and you are, I like that color, above the pelvic pain line, then you will refer to this region. So above pelvic pain line. So this, and remember, I'll do the back too. We're basically looking in this region. So those pelvic organs or hindgut organs that are in contact with the peritoneum, they're above that pelvic pain line. Those are going to refer to the lower back and groin region. That is going to be different. Let's see what kind of crazy color I can get. Let's see if yellow works. Nope, that's not going to work. I'll have to draw right on it and not highlight on it. If you are below the pelvic pain line, if you're distal sigmoid colon, if you are the lower uterus and vagina, you will refer pain back to S2 to S4. So that is going to be the perineum region. So you could potentially have pain in your genitalia or basically anywhere in your perineum from things like uterine contractions, prostate infections, anything that's in the pelvis itself can refer to the perineum. Okay. This was quick and kind of messy with obviously some low technology, but hopefully this gave you an opportunity to review some of this stuff quickly, and hopefully you could double speed me. We look forward to doing a more polished lecture in the future. Thank you guys very much.